All right, week 2 of the Clarity Academy. Welcome back. So, today, what I want to do is I want to talk to you a little bit about what we have coming up, where we're at in the program. I'm going to recap some of the stuff that we went over last week, some of the common questions that came up, and then we'll get into the assignments for this week and we'll talk about what all that entails. So, first thing is right now we're in ideals, and that is going to be this module for the first 4 weeks. So there's going to be 3 total modules: the ideals, and then we'll get into self-exploration, which is really figuring out, like, once we figure out who do we want to be in the world, like what's ideal for us, then we'll move into self-exploration, figuring out, like, how did we get who we are, like why are we the way that we are. That's the best way to put it. And really, like, exploring into, like, what is it that makes us up, right? So that's self-exploration, and how did we get to where we are. And then the last module is going to be sustainability, and that's taking all of these things that we've done, figuring out how to fit them into our lifestyle so that we can sustainably live out our ideals. Because one of the things that happens is we get super excited about, this is who we want to be, we feel like we have this date with destiny, we have these breakthroughs, we do this transformational work, then we go right back out into the world, and the world pushes us down. And so, and it kind of says, like, get back in your box. That's what it feels like a lot of the times. And so with this work, we want to not only make sure that we do it, we figure out who we are, but also that we are able to figure out how to make it work for us long term. Now, getting back to this module, remember there is a rhythm to this course. And so there's a lot of work for a few weeks, and then there's 1 week where the last week of each module is much less work, much less deep work, much less thinking. And it's kind of a time where we can catch up, and then we can really work individually. And that's when I'll open up the coaching calls, and we'll start working through some of this material, and I'll really start helping you on an individual basis. And so that call that week, on the 4th week, will really be recapping a lot of what we've done and just sort of talking through it. And I find that to be super important. And the reason I'm saying it is because as you think about this course and you think about yourself going through it, one of the things that has come up a lot is people say, like, oh, I wanted to get you this assignment, but this came up. This course isn't about me. It's really about you. This is a very individual thing, and I'm going to keep hammering that home, because what we want to do, remember, you signed up for this course for you. It's not for me. And so I would like you to get the assignments in and get them done that week. But, like, this is your life. I understand, like, things get busy. At the end of the day, the more time that you're able to cut out for this work yourself, the more you're going to get out of it. But that being said, I totally understand that things come up, and just know, don't stress yourself out about it, because as we get into the coursework, there will be natural times built into it where you can catch up and sort of figure out what you've missed, and converse with other people, and I've got all that stuff built in. So, okay, so the reason, remember, that we're doing the ideals first is because to contend with all of the possibilities that what could be for our life can be really difficult. And what we need to do is we need to find some selecting mechanism for all of the infinite possibilities for what our life could be. The way that we do that is we figure out, well, what is ideal? So the way that I'm explaining that this week is to think about how much difficulty you have saying yes or saying no to things, I mean. So 2 things happen. Here's what we do a lot. We are in an overcommitted culture. We say no, and then as soon as we say no, we have so much trouble standing on that no. And so what do? We say no to something, and then we spend the next 10 or 15 or whatever, however many minutes, kind of backpedaling and, like, trying to figure out how to justify why we said no. We're going to get into why that is. But then the other thing that happens is we say yes out of obligation, and we end up, then some time goes by and we end up in that situation that we said yes to, and we would literally rather do any other thing in the world than whatever it was we said yes to, because we didn't really want to do it in the first place. Here's why. What happens is when we say yes or no to things, it feels very personal. Like, do you want to come to my party? No, I sure don't. That sounds very personal, and so you feel the need to justify yourself or to say yes out of obligation to be a good person. So what I want you to do is we need to figure out a way to not make that personal, because this is your life. So once we figure out our ideals, there's a question that we ask ourselves with every opportunity that comes along. And that question is, does this fit into the vision that I have for my life or not? And that's it. And once you become confident, and we'll get into how you become confident, but once you really figure out what you want and who you want to be, it's much easier to be confident in your decisions because everything is much more black and white. Does this fit into the vision that I have for my life or not? And if the reason is, or if the answer is not, it doesn't, then it needs to be a no. One of the things that happens is we have what we think we want our life to be. We say yes to all of these opportunities. See, the world is going to continue to present opportunities for you. That's not going to change at all. So one of the things that happens is we continue to say yes to opportunities. Imagine like a flow chart. We say yes to this, and then yes to this, and yes to this. And if this is our ideal life, we tend to say yes to all of the great opportunities, and then we end up in a situation where we don't even recognize our life, and we're like, how did I possibly get here? The reason being because you are always saying yes to opportunities. Now, our parents are going to push us into good opportunities because they want what's best for us. The problem is that they have values and they have a worldview, and this goes for anybody that's going to push you into a good opportunity. There is no shortage of opportunities. They're only good based on what they value. And if that's not what you value and you decide to act on it anyway, you end up pretty far from what you wanted your life to be. And so a lot of us are living out this idea. And so what does that look like? Opportunities tend to make us feel like victims in our own life. And we don't feel like we have control. And the reason is all of these opportunities are well-intentioned. And so we're well-intentioned to say yes to them. The reason we feel like a victim is because we don't feel like we have control in our own lives. And the reason is we don't, because we don't have a vision for our lives. So we're not saying yes or no. We're not self-selecting on opportunities. We're simply saying yes to what is a good opportunity, and then we're ending up far from who we want to be. And that's the danger with not starting out with an ideal. So one thing I want you to think about that I use as an example in this course is that I recently transitioned out of the military after over a decade of service. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because now the military is some things to know about the military. It's a guaranteed paycheck, right? It's stability like you wouldn't believe, like it's really hard to lose your job. And then the long-term benefits are really good, right? Especially if you've done some time and then you've got seniority and rank. And so one of the reasons that people are going to always push you to stay in, they say like, if you go past 10 years, then you have to stay in. The reason I'm telling you this is because my parents, my mentors, so many people had a laundry list of reasons why staying in was a good opportunity. Now, I didn't necessarily want to stay in, but at the end of my first enlistment, I didn't have a vision for my life. And so what did I do? I said yes to the opportunity. It was like a huge re-enlistment bonus, continued benefits. Like, I don't really want to do this, but like, what else would I do? I don't want to go be a loser, do nothing. So I said yes to opportunities. And then I ended up realizing how far from all of my really deep core values I was living based on saying yes to this opportunity. And then I felt in this situation like I was stuck. Now, part of that is because there's a contract, and a lot of your jobs aren't going to have contracts or whatever. But the reason I'm bringing this up and the reason it's so important is to think there are always good opportunities, right? For me, I would be betraying my deepest core values if I were to stay. And that is the biggest problem. And so, if we don't know what our ideal life looks like, and that's not built off our core values, well then of course we're going to say yes to opportunity, and we're not going to know why we feel so shitty about the opportunities that we're taking. And that happens a lot. And a lot of times when we struggle between opportunities, it's like, this is a good deal and this is a good deal. The reason we're struggling is we don't want either fully. And we don't really know why. And the why is because we're not in alignment with our values. And so that is a huge problem. And that's why we start with our ideals. Now, here's one of the things that happens. I really want to stress this idea of responsibility today, because one of the reasons that people do not participate in life to this degree is because we are always subconsciously trying to protect ourselves. We always will make ourselves seem better to ourselves in order to protect ourselves. Like that's a psychological coping mechanism. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because deep down, like deep seated, one of the reasons that you don't take full responsibility for your life or set your life up and come up with these ideals is because then the onus for your happiness and for the success of your life is then shifted completely on you. Whereas if you are just accepting all of these responsibilities and all of these things that you should be doing, and then your life doesn't work out like you had hoped, well, it's not really your fault. So you've kind of padded your ego and you've protected yourself. And our ego will do crazy things in order to protect itself, even if it's not in the best interest of us long term. Now, go back to my example of the military. As soon as I said that this wasn't going to work for me, the problem that I ran into is that now it's completely on me. I've walked away from the benefits. I've walked away from the laundry list of good opportunities for good reason, because it didn't work in my core values, which we're going to get to today. But then the onus is on me to make my life actually work. And because one of my deepest core values is freedom, and it's like my personal why, well, now I'm in a position where I have, it's like, this is completely on me. Like you said, this is what you want. It's what you want, but you still got to make it work. And that's like one of the things we struggle with is this, like, we have a date with destiny, but then we have a period where we actually have to do the work. There's no more, we figured it out. Right now, we're figuring it out. But one of the things that you might notice as you're going through ideals, I've already heard it from people going through their ideal day, is that they get part of the way through it, and then they get struck with anxiety. One of the reasons that you're getting struck with anxiety is because your deepest within you is realizing, like your deep ego, subconscious, all of these parts of you that are buried are realizing, like, we need to keep listening to people. We can't do that. Like, we can't be responsible for how this shit turns out. And you have to reject that, because you are responsible. At the end of the day, everything is going somewhere. And so it's important that you realize where what you're doing now is going, and that you take ownership in the direction of that thing. Your career, your relationships. You don't have a relationship with anybody or anything in your life that's not going somewhere. And so if it's not going somewhere positive, it's going somewhere negative. And so what we need to do is we need to root through all of these things. One of the things that people are going to come up with in their ideal day is that they'll realize that parts of their life are not fitting with their ideal day, which is what we did last week. Now, something to ask yourself, when you come up with all these components, you're like, I'm giving a lot of my time and energy to this thing, and this thing. Now, something to ask yourself, if it's not part of your ideal day, is that thing a means or is it an end? Because if it's a means, you can justify the behavior if it's going to get you to where you want to be. But if there's no end in sight, then that relationship, your relationship with that thing is growing somewhere negative. It's not going where you want it to go. And so we need to figure out a way to make it positive. And we're going to do that later in the course. But just something to think about as you're going through this. Like this need for responsibility is going to hit you pretty hard. The second thing that I want to mention today is reason. So one of the things that my coach said to me is reasonable people tend to be unhappy with their lives. And I believe that fully. Now I want to explain to you why I believe that. So reason is an interesting thing. Whatever you perceive to be reasonable is based only on how you've been raised. And that's it. Like whatever you experience, whatever you were told, whatever you think is reasonable is based on the experiences that you've had in the world up until now. And so what you think is reasonable and what I think is reasonable are not going to be the same thing. They might be similar. Maybe we were raised in similar places. But other than that, they're not the same thing. And so that is the danger of basing your life off reason, because what's reasonable is total speculation. A 5 is only average in the presence of a 4 and a 6. And so whatever your understanding of reasonable is probably incorrect. Now, the reason that I say reason. Now, the reason I bring this up is because my coach pushed me to be unreasonable when I was coming up with a lot of my ideals. And when we get into goal setting, this is going to be super important. Now, the reason it's important is because my coach was doing exactly what I wanted to do with my life. He was podcasting and coaching and leading transformation workshops and doing all these things, seminars and stuff. And I thought, You know what? That is bullshit because I've held myself back from doing what I really wanted to do based off what I thought was reasonable. Here's this person doing exactly all the things that I wanted to do with no unique talents outside of the ability to grow. And he's doing all the things that I want to do to the degree to which I would want to do them. So that just goes to show you he was just raised or was able to change his mind or was able to figure out that reasonable is a road to nowhere. It doesn't mean anything. It only means it's only a representation of how you were raised. And so you need to throw reason out the window. Now, where does this come into play when we're doing these exercises? Good question. It comes into play when you second guess anything. Because here's what happens. And this is getting into these past week exercises, but it's going to be going forward too. One of the most common feedbacks that I hear when people are doing their ideal day or their ideal self is that they will start second guessing it and then they get caught up in this feedback loop. Because here's what happened. Somewhere within you, this voice that always knows, it always knows what's best for you, like this part of you deep down that knows exactly what you want, you summon it when you write, essentially. And what happens is, all of a sudden your conscious mind goes, wait, what about what dad said? Or what about what mom said? Or what about that one time where you experienced that one guy who went out on a limb and his life failed and he ended up a loser? Like, your conscious mind is going to play tricks on you, and it's going to do everything in its power to protect your ego from ending up whatever you consider to be an adverse situation. And so that's something you really need to guard yourself against, and you need to stop second guessing yourself. So when you write this stuff down, there are processes later for review. And if you want to go back and look at what you've written later, that's a review process. That's different. That's figuring out different things, looking at it from different angles. But when you're just writing it, the second guessing, it can't happen. You need to get rid of it because it is your conscious mind trying to protect your ego 99% of the time, and it needs to go away. The ideal self work. I want to continue to do this throughout this problem or throughout this course. So one of the things that I told you guys was that for me, the ideal self thing, I was fully immersed in this work for a full week, and it was 3 days before I even came up with any kind of image for what I wanted myself to look like or to be. And so you have to continue to do this ideal self. It's not a set it and forget it. Like you need to continue to try to figure it out. Consistency is one of the most underutilized traits in humanity today. Like, what you could get done with consistency is absolutely ridiculous. It's just that we don't understand because we're so inconsistent, because our attention spans are being pulled by every single facet of modern life. And so our ability to be consistent over the long term has really dwindled. And so we actually are capable of so much more just simply by punching the clock every day, and we don't understand that. The reason I'm bringing it up in this context is because with deep work, it's no different. If you are able to be consistent over the long term, you're going to get to better, deeper answers that are layers below whatever you got to the first time you started doing it. So if you started already having these like breakthrough moments in week one, great, but it's nothing yet. Like, you haven't even gotten there yet. So some people might prioritize, like, one person I heard say, like, if I didn't have an hour, I didn't do it. And that is an incorrect attitude to take to this work because the consistency matters so much. Would I like you to have an hour every single day in a perfect world? Of course, if you can. If you have 15 minutes today, it's not ideal, but like, get that memory down. Get yourself used to unlearning, because that's what this process is, right? Like, coming to find yourself is just unlearning what the world has told you that you are. And that takes consistency because, like I said, there are layers in week one. We're looking at different layers with different exercises. But to get really down to the core, one, it's not going to happen in 12 weeks at all. Like, this is a continued practice, and that's why we have the whole sustainability piece. But then the other part of that is, like, the consistency will allow you to go deeper over time, and that's where you're really going to start getting a lot of breakthroughs, and you're going to start knowing yourself. Like, the value of knowing who you are in any given situation is so important. One of the things that has come up in the group calls is this idea that you are able to think of your ideal self before going into situations. And the reason that's important is because if you remember when I talked to you about the ideal self exercise, one of the things that you're supposed to think about is, how are other people going to perceive you? And when you get really good at summoning up your ideal self, like just thinking about it by looking at just a symbol or whatever it is for you, the word, whatever, you're able to then author all of the moments in your day around your ideal self. So let me give you an example. You go into a meeting and you just start the conversation. How most people go into a meeting is they just go in and they start talking about whatever the agenda is that day. But because they haven't thought about enough about how they want to be perceived, not just what they're going to say, but how they want to be perceived by the other person, there's communication cues that are constantly being missed. Now, if you've ever been in a relationship or a meeting or any kind of interaction that has spun out of control really fast and you realize you're both talking past each other, that's how that happens. Because neither of you have thought about how you wanted to be perceived by the other person and how they're going to perceive you or how they're thinking about the situation. And so when you have this ability to go into your ideal self, man, even when you find yourself in these situations that begin to spiral out of control, like the relationship argument that I'm talking about, you can bring it all back to center by just thinking about your ideal self, looking at your symbol, whatever that is, and then, over time you've trained yourself to think about how do I want to be perceived in any given situation, and you're able to summon that situation. And I've seen it with myself in client calls and also in development calls, in business development calls. It was like I went in there guns hot and I had this idea and I noticed that I was losing and I was like, I'm not being my ideal self right now. I'm just shooting from the hip, doing what the world says to do. And I have no control. I'm not authoring my existence here in life anymore. And that is a problem. And so that's one of the continued reasons for the ideal self. So consistency. The other one is not checking your phone. Listen, it's really difficult not to check your phone. Now, some of you have probably noticed it from week 1 already. You start doing this work and then you just pick up your phone out of habit. Well, it is part habit. The other thing that's happening is you're meeting some resistance there. So there's some area where you're like trying to write and you're all of a sudden you're having to dig a little deeper for the answers. And so you pick up your phone because it pacifies you from having to do the deep work. And that is super subconscious, not even something that you get to control, but it is something that's happening to you. So if you're finding that you're having trouble with that, not everyone will, but I did, then leave your phone somewhere. Like leave it in your car when you go into the coffee shop. That's my move, because I will check it. I find it when I'm writing, when I'm doing the deep work, when I'm doing goal setting. It doesn't matter. If I run into resistance, I will pacify myself with whatever's closest. My brain's been pacifying myself with a phone for so long, and it's so easy. And it's like, you know what would help right now? Quick hit of dopamine. And so what do? I pick up the phone and then I do it. And it's just distracting me from that deep work. Now, this is where consistency comes in. When you start doing this deep work, and I talked in week 1 about 55 minutes for me. Paul Madero is about 25 minutes, their productivity thing. Whatever works for you. For me, it's 55 minutes of straight work. When I start doing that consistently, my writing quality improves so much. The reason I'm saying it is because the quality of the work of your thinking improves. And that's where consistency happens. So there is a lot. We're going to get into lifestyle design with some of the sustainability things. But when you think about it, any time that your discipline falls short, you can really gain a lot by making up for that with your lifestyle. So like, does it matter if you're so disciplined that you don't check your phone or if you leave your phone at home and just go do it? Doesn't matter how you got to where you got to, right? So sometimes we have to, I'm finding how like you can improve your results by lifestyle design, by making up for places that you lack. I don't care. Like I'm not ashamed to be like, I don't have the discipline to not check my phone. I don't really care. All I care about is, can I do the deep work? Can I figure out who I really am? Can I do the assignments? The way that I do that is by leaving my phone, by setting my lifestyle up so it works. So just some things to think about as you're going into this work. Okay, so today we're going to have a few assignments. The first one is going to be all about values. So here's the thing with values. What values do, these are all buzzwords that are very overused in our culture. Like every company has values, and quite honestly, like if they're not living by them, they mean nothing. And that is the case with 90% of people that profess to have values. They're not actually living by them. They're not checking in with them. And Yeah, we're going to change that because that is, here's what happens when you find yourself in life, especially if you're going through transitions. But the reality is, life is always shifting on us, like things are always changing. What we do is we set our aim. A proper aim is set on values. And when we're living out our values, regardless of what the world is doing below us, like regardless of the ground shifting below us, what allows us to keep our footing and keep moving in one direction is when we have an aim. And when we set that aim on values, values don't change. And that's why we use that as the governing body for our lives. Because regardless of whether you got fired or dumped or a diagnosis or it does or the victim of terrible behavior from a friend, like you've been betrayed, it doesn't matter. If you live up to your values, it gives you a place to hang your hat. It gives you a north. It gives you a direction. It's an aim that doesn't change. And for that reason, it's one of the most important things that anybody can do is to come up with their values. Now, what I would like you to do first for your first assignment is to come up with 3 to 7 words that you think that are going to be your core values. Now, these can be aspirational, and I'll get into why that is, but you can be like consistency, for example, for me is one of my values. I do not live, I really screw that up a lot, but by checking in with it, I've been able to rein that in so much. So like last week, for example, I wasn't doing some of this deep work that I preach and that I know I get so much out of. When I checked my personal manifesto, and I'll get into how you put that in there, and I read my values and I read consistency, I instantly knew what I needed to do. And this is why it's so important to have a north arrow, a direction to navigate when you don't know what else to do. One of the things that happens in our lives is when we're not living in congruence with our values, deep down we know it, and even if we don't know it consciously, we feel like shit. And I'll give you an example. So here's a really blatant example. So if you are with a partner, let's say a relationship, a romantic relationship, and you cheat on them, and then you feel like shit about it, the reason you feel like shit about it is because you either value honesty or have been told to value honesty, and deep down, you're not living it out. And that situation is playing itself out in our lives in millions of different ways all the time. Because we don't know exactly what we value and we don't vocalize it, we are unable to live in alignment with it. Now, in the contrast of that, when we do bring our actions in alignment with our values, man, there's almost nothing like it. You have more energy. You show up a better human. You don't have this internal pull, like I'm not living up to the life I should be living up to. I'm not being the person I should be. The problem is you're not. and the problem is a lot of people have that. The reason is they've never figured out what it is they do value, so they don't know how to bring their actions in alignment with that value. All they know is that something is wrong. The biggest thing that is wrong is that you're not living up to your values, and it's super important to do. And so what you would like to do, or what I would suggest doing at first, is coming up with lots of descripting words for values that you find to be important. So what you're going to find is when you do this, a lot of these values can be grouped together, and they can be explained in 3 to 7 words. Like honesty and integrity and maybe forthrightness or something like that. Like you can bunch these together to come up with one. Now, everybody's are probably going to be similar, but probably not to the same weight. So, for example, freedom for me is like I value nothing probably more than freedom, except for maybe growth. But this is super important to think about because not everybody does, right? Like that's why not everybody's an entrepreneur. Like I'm willing to be uncomfortable and to starve to death in my attempt for freedom because that's how much I value it. Not everybody does, and honestly, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. And so, something to think about in your own life is like the weight of the value too. So think about, and we'll get into how to weigh it. So right now it doesn't matter too much, but you need to come up with these values so that you can so that you can start to think about how they're playing out in your life. So assignment 1 is to come up with 3 to 7 values. Assignment number 2, and this is going to be the uncomfortable part, is to shine a spotlight in your life and to figure out what you are actually valuing. So I said at the beginning, a lot of companies say they have core values, but their actions don't show it. So whatever they say, whatever they hang on the wall, means nothing Like if you're not living in accordance with your values, then mean nothing. Like why even have them? I would say the Navy does that, to be honest with you. But that's just my perspective on that. But so the way that we're going to shine a light. Sorry, I got a little lost there. So the way that we're going to shine a light onto our values is by checking two things. We're going to check our bank account and we're going to go through our bookshelf. Because what we give our time and money to say more about what we value than almost anything else in our life, because those are two resources that human beings have decided that they are going to place value on. Time makes sense because it is a resource that you don't get more of, right? There's a finite amount of time and that's going away. Now money, there's always can be made more of it, but we don't ever feel like that. And so the way that we do spend our money does say something about what we value. So I'm going to give you a couple examples of how this plays out. So one of my values would be health, or vitality actually is the one I came up with, which is derived from health. Now if I go through my bank account and I realize that I'm eating at a 7-Eleven constantly, well, guess what? I'm not valuing my health. I'm going to give you another example. I was listening to I'm not valuing my health. I was listening to a nutrition coach talk and he had a client. And the client said he was doing really well. He was like, but yeah, every once in a while I find myself, like he's like, last week I found myself in between meetings and I had to sprint to Subway to just buy something to eat just to make it through, the workday. And the nutrition coach, what he said back was, what the fuck? You didn't know that you had to eat lunch on a Tuesday? Like, is that something you could have prepared for? Of course it is. Like, we all know we have to eat lunch on a Tuesday, but we don't prepare for it because we don't necessarily value it or we're not living in accordance with that value. And that's where we can start to come in alignment, right? Because that person that ate Subway probably felt like shit about eating all that bread and, whatever it is. How do we bring it back? And this isn't a nutrition lecture. This is how do we bring our life back in accordance with our values? We check our bank account. The other one is a bookshelf. And here's the example for this. So my mentor, what he was saying to me is that he went to his coach and he said one of the things that he really valued was relationships in his life, which is an important one. I think we should all value relationships, to be honest with you. And his mentor said, like, oh, do you spend a lot of money like going to relationship seminars and learning? And he was like, no. And he was like, oh, well, do you read a lot of books about how to be in a relationship and how to communicate? And he was like, no. Well, I read one book like a while ago and it was The 5 Love Languages. And he was like, oh. So you don't value relationships at all. At least you're not living in accordance with them. Now, maybe you do. Of course you do. But the disconnection in our lives is coming from not living in accordance with our values. And so we look at our bank account and we look at our bookshelf. And those two things are going to say more about how we're living our lives than probably anything else. Important to bring those back in alignment. So assignment number 2, how are you living now? I want you to look through your bank account and your bookshelf, and I want you to write down what it says about the things that you value. Now, some of them, I'm sure, are going to be in alignment with what you came down from your wish list of values, we'll say, or your ideals, right? And some of them aren't. And it's super important that you be very honest with yourself in this exercise. One of the things that happens is we live in delusion. We're delusional about how we're living our lives. The reason being what I referenced earlier, which is we have psychological coping mechanisms in place that protect our own ego from feeling like shit about things. And so we tell ourselves, like, you're doing all right, man. You're doing pretty good. Like, you're killing it. Now, this isn't a front on self-love or on accepting yourself or anything like that. This is just being very blunt and honest because there's no way we can get better if we don't know where we're at. Plain and simple. And so the reason we do this is it allows us to stop living in delusion, and you're able to look at your life. When you come up with these, you're going to look through, you're going to batch some things, you're going to be like, okay, I'm spending a lot of money on this kind of food and this kind of food. And what does that say about me? It says I'm not really valuing health. And you're going to see it in black and white, and you're going to say, holy shit. Like, there are some things that need to be corrected in my life. That's why we're here. That's why we're doing this work. There's zero shame in that. Even now, even once you become aware of it, you're going to fall off sometimes. That's why we reference these things. That's why we have sustainability, and that's why we come back and we start living in alignment. There's you feel so disconnected from your life when you're not living in accordance with your core values. 90% of our problems, I would say, that's a totally made up statistic, but such a high percentage of our problems are coming from the fact we're not living in accordance with our values. It's a real problem. Okay, so that is going to be the 2 exercises on values. The second thing we're going to do this week is we're going to figure out our why. So there's going to be 2 exercises with this too, and you're not going to like the second one probably. But here's the thing. Why, our why, whatever that is, it's such a buzzword. And some of that is from Simon Sinek and some of the work that he's done. But it's such it's so overproduced and oversaid, and it's almost lost its meaning, and we don't really know what it means. And most of the people that have a why, I would say it's not a deep enough why to actually matter. And so I'm going to push you to be very deep with your why this week. Now, what I want to do is I want to talk about the difference between a personal why and a situational why. So most of us when we come up with our why do we do what we do? Why do we get up every day? When we come up with our why, it's situational. I'm going to give you an example for this. Dr. Sean Pastuch, who owns Active Life RX, which if you guys aren't familiar with their work, first of all, it's great, great business. But what they started out doing anyway, was providing rehab for CrossFitters. Okay, just a little backstory. So his coach asked him what his why was. Why do you want to get better at this? And he came up with what most people would come up with. He said, well, I want CrossFitters to feel like they can work out pain-free while providing a good life for my wife and daughter. And the next thing that his coach said is, well, if your wife and daughter were to die tomorrow, heaven forbid, would you stop working for the rest of your life? No. Okay, so now what we're seeing is there's a situational why and a deep personal why. It's important that we delineate these because your situation in life can always change, and it can change fast, and there's nothing you can do about it. And so how do we protect ourselves against the shifting sands? We set our aim properly. We set our values properly. Our why is going to be our deepest rooted value. And so my why is personal freedom. That is it. No matter what I do, what the situation is, I value the idea that nobody can have dominion over my fate more than me. And so, again, this isn't a why that I would wish on anybody. It's just something deep within me, this just deep rebellious nature that I have that produces this why. But I also know, because it's so true, that I will work my ass off for it. I will do the work. I will put myself in the situations and that I have to do in order to succeed to make that why come to fruition. And that is the difference, or that is the power of having a really deep-seated why. You take all the power back in your life because you're this is the direction, man. It doesn't matter what the list of opportunities looks like over here. It doesn't matter. All of these things lose their power to control you and tell you what to do when you find yourself in a position where you actually know what you want to do and where you want to go. And so I want you to delineate between a personal and a situational why. I want you to come up with a personal why, very individual. Now, the question you need to ask yourself when you start coming up with your why is, can this why be changed by a situation? Could the person that you're talking about die? Now, if you die, obviously, it's game over, so it doesn't matter. But if you're saying your why is your wife or your daughter or whatever, it's important to have a situational why. I'm not saying it's not, and this isn't an idea to reject that responsibility or anything like that. But what I'm saying is we need to figure out what makes you tick. Deepest within you, what pushes you to do the things that you do every single day. There are times for situational whys, but this course, it's going to be individualistic because we are going to use that because it's going to tell us a lot about ourselves, and we're going to use that to help guide us through the rest of this work. So that is your third exercise. Come up with your personal why. What drives us to make the decisions that we make, and then untangle that from your current situation. And then the last one is that, the last assignment is that you are going to be paired up with somebody. So the group email will come out this week. It's going to pair you up with somebody else on the course, and you are going to share your personal why with them. All I would like out of you is a 20 to 30 minute phone conversation at some point in the next week after you come up with your why. I will pair you up at random in the email The reason I'm doing it at random is because I don't want you to do it with somebody that you're comfortable with. I want you to do it with someone that you actually don't know at all. So hopefully it works out that way. But here's why. At the beginning of this call, the beginning of this lecture, one of the things that I said is that you're going to do this work. You are going to have breakthroughs, and they're going to be very individual to you, and you are going to be really empowered to act on them. And then you're going to go out in the world, and the world's going to push you back into your box, and you are going to completely forget about all of the work that we've done here today or throughout this course. What we need to do is we need to get comfortable being who we are. How do you do that? You got to go out into the world and you got to tell them who the hell you are. If you ever want to act on it, if you ever want to live up to your ideals, then you have to be okay with making other people uncomfortable. Because here's the reality. You think it's a really uncomfortable situation to go tell somebody like, I want to do this now, or I'm thinking about doing this. The reality is, it is uncomfortable. It's much more uncomfortable for you, and a lot of that discomfort is perceived based on how you were raised, how you grew up, whatever. Remember, we're unlearning. You need to learn to be yourself, to be confident in the decisions you make. And when you come up with a why that is so individual that it cannot be changed by any situation, then you then have the power to go out and make decisions based on that why. And then when you say yes or no to things, it's not personal, it's about your life. And that's what we're doing here. We want to make you the best you possible, so whatever situation you show up in, you are ready to go. So I'm going to do a quick recap, 4 assignments this week. Come up with 3 to 7 values, deep core values. Assignment number 2, figure out how you are living now and what that says about what you actually value. Assignment number 3, untangle your why. Come up with a personal why, not a situational why. And number 4, you are going to jump on a phone call with somebody else. It can be Skype, it can be whatever. I don't have access to your phone numbers, so use the Slack channel, use email to figure it out, how to get in contact with this person, how to get their phone number or whatever. And then just have a conversation about it. Now, if you're the person sharing your why, I want you to share it confidently. If you're the person that is receiving it at the time, then I want you to be critical. I want you not to be an asshole, but I want you to push it kind of like I'm pushing you now, or like Sean's coach pushed him. I want you to challenge it. I want you to try to take, if there are parts of it that could be taken away or taken off the table, I want you to do that. Through that process, you two talk it out, and then you come up with a more deeper why. Because if you don't, like, as soon as we jump on a call and we do this, that's the first thing that I'm going to do. I'm going to challenge the fuck out of it. Because here's the thing. You're going out into the world, you're doing something different. Like, just by authoring your own existence and what you want for your life, you're doing something completely different than what 99% of people do. Another made up stat, but we both know it's true. And so you need to get confident in sharing that experience and standing on it, right? And being okay with the decisions you've made. One of the reasons we do work at such a deep level is because we know it resonates with us so truly that it puts us in a position to act on it. When our actions come in alignment with our values and what we want for ourselves, it is a different kind of life. If you do all this work to do it, and then you go back out in the world and it completely spreads you back out, and you're like, oh, let me just fit in, then that's what you're going to do. And you'll get the same thing that all the other reasonable people get, which is unhappy. So hopefully this makes sense to you guys. A lot of information, a lot of assignments. Again, don't get overwhelmed. Work through it at your own pace. There will be times to catch up, and it's not a big deal. Hopefully this one makes sense for you guys. I'll talk to you later.